This episode of Fermented Adventure the Podcast is sponsored by Brewskits, handcrafted dog treats made from spent beer grains, oats, barley, and rye. No chemical preservatives, a great source of fiber, and packed with protein. Visit brewskits.com to see the full selection of treats for your dog and your cat. Receive 15% off, no minimum purchase on your first order by typing in lowercase FA 2024 at checkout. Cheers! Hello, ladies and gentlemen, craft spirit enthusiasts, and those interested in the intoxicating world of craft distilleries, cideries, meaderies, wineries, and the occasional foray into breweries. It's Rich Shane, and welcome to Fermented Adventure, the podcast, where we bring you the fascinating people that are making the mash, fermenting, distilling, bottling, pouring, and delivering to you some of the finest libations in the world. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. Thank you for bringing the podcast into wherever you are and whatever you're doing. We truly are grateful that you have chosen to listen and make us part of your day. It would mean the world to us if you left a 5-star review. This helps us climb in the rankings, and it makes it easier for others to find us. Don't hesitate to leave us your comments as well. If the podcast didn't meet your expectations, tell us why. We're always striving to improve. You can find us at fermentedadventure.com. We are on Instagram and Facebook as Fermented Adventure. Email us at fermentedadventure@gmail.com. All right, FA Nation, let's meet our guest. He's Don Shump. I'm Rich Shane. This is Fermented Adventure, the podcast. Don, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rich.
Don, we're going to have a sweet discussion today because we're going to talk Philadelphia Bee Company and this amazing honey, which I can't wait to taste because I haven't tried it yet. Don, how did Philadelphia Bee Company get started?
So I started beekeeping back in 2007. I like to quip to people that I had a quarter-life crisis. I was a web developer in a former life. And so I had taken up beekeeping just as a hobby and fell in love with it. And so I volunteered at a community garden for a year and then bought a couple of my hives of my own. And then 2 turned into 10 and 10 turned into 20. And the next thing you know, I left the web industry and started my own beekeeping business.
You're in Philadelphia. And the first thing that comes to mind to me is, as a beekeeper, I picture fields and flowers and fauna and all of that. How is beekeeping done in the Philadelphia area?
So urban beekeeping is actually a thing that's been around for a while. I think Paris has one of the oldest beekeeping schools in the world. And so even in Philly, we have photos of beekeepers on rooftops, back in the early 20th century. And so for us, it's predominantly roofs that we use. We do have some other ground level spaces that we can put yards in, like, I have an abandoned cemetery in Southwest, Fox Chase Farm up in the Northeast. And so there's other spots where we go. But in terms of in the city, it's kind of interesting because in a lot of cases, we actually get more complex honey from the city because the bees are collecting mostly from abandoned lots. In Philly, we have somewhere in around like 40,000. And so nobody does anything with those. And so they're just covered in weeds, and the bees can collect that. And depending on what time of year and what part of the city, you can get different honeys.
So for you, as you become experienced, if I blind taste tested you and tasted and gave you your honey to taste, could you tell me where that honey originated from?
It would have to depend on the time of year. I think would be easier than the location, just because literally every frame we pull is different within a hive, and so year to year there can be significant differences. And so my West Philly spring might be like a water white. I had an Old City fall honey from 2016 that was the color of my shirt. It was black as pitch. And so, in terms of, seasonal, there's a lot more variation. Within a year, though, like any yard could be different.
Brewskits, beer grain, dog bones, brewskits. Your dog will go wild. Brewskits. Beer Green Dog Bones, a healthy alternative for your pup.
Brewskits are all natural and made in the USA. Visit brewskit.com. That's BREWSCUID.com.
We've talked to Brian Warner of the World Honey Exchange, got a great education about honeys internationally and also about beekeeping. And I'm curious for you, how do you manage your hives? Because, you've got the whole thing with keeping the queen and the hive healthy. And, like you said, they're up on rooftops. How do you manage those hives?
It takes a lot more time than it normally would. For a sideline beekeeper, and sideliner is anybody who has, generally speaking, 500 or less colonies, like you can put, a couple hundred colonies in a single field and manage that on the weekends and still work a full-time job. For me, we're running on the high end, say 150, plus colonies. It takes me 7 hours just to drive to all my yards and wave at them, not even look at a single bee.
wave, hello bees.
Yeah. How you doing, girls? And so, that's I'd say that's the hardest part. I mean, in some cases, it's actually difficult to get on the roofs. Like we had an apiary in South Philadelphia where I literally had to climb through a window in the back on the upstairs just to get onto the roof and then up another ladder to get to the roof proper. And so you get some of that finagling, which is a lot more challenging than just driving up to a field and hopping out of your truck.
I checked out your website. I've seen your social media. One of the things I love that stands out first and foremost is, look, you're doing this this beard and almost a cape full of bees. And I have to ask you, do you do that often? Is that something like you break out for parlor tricks and you say, hey, I'm at a party and Don, do the bee thing,
So it depends on the time of year. So what we're talking about is bee bearding. And with that, typically the way we would do that I do that for Honey Festival. The Philadelphia Honey Festival is usually the weekend after Labor Day every year. And so it's a 2 to 3 day event, and I will do a bee beard each one of those days. The bee beard itself takes, a couple days of prep if you're just setting it up, from an existing colony. And what we're doing is we're making a swarm. And so swarms are how bees normally split their colonies in two and make new hives. And so when they run out of space, the old queen will leave with half the colony and go look for a new place to live. And the original colony will make new queens. When they're swarming like that, that's when the most docile will find them. And so if I find a swarm, in the springtime, we get tons of swarm calls. And so I could literally take a swarm of bees, find their queen, put her in a cage, and yes, I could absolutely just slap them on my face for kicks and grins. We don't normally do that because, I'm trying to get them into a hive. But that's at least once a year I'm putting bees on my face.
Now, you mentioned something about calls because you also do bee and wasp removal from buildings, houses, outside, wherever they can become potentially a nuisance or a problem. You go out and you take care of that.
Yeah, anything that flies and stings is in our wheelhouse. And so we do it all. We don't use any chemicals. In the case of wasps, it's usually an extermination. So if you have, if you're talking about like bald-faced hornets and say like yellow jackets, those can't be relocated. But we're one of the only companies in the Philadelphia area that does honeybee removal. And so if you get honeybees in your house, you can't have them exterminated, not because it's illegal, but because it's a liability. Like the honeybee colonies are just so much larger than a yellow jackets. If you down them, it's going to smell terrible. And, and it's just going to, and then, you're going to have honey and, liquid rot going through your wall. It's a bad scene. And so we do the removals and we actually use the honeybee colonies in our, beekeeping operation. And so those hives that I'm taking out of people's walls end up in, one of our apiaries. And that's where we're getting our honey from.
I love that you recycle and repurpose those honeys that you're extracting from people's houses and buildings, right?
Yeah, no, and that's when we're like, so most of the honeys we actually pull out of the buildings. Like I keep that for myself. We don't really market that out to the public, and because I have, I don't have full control over it. And so, I think it's perfectly safe to eat. A lot of times I'll skip lunch and I'll just eat literally what I'm pulling out of the wall. Like my doctor doesn't love it. He's like, this is the one-way ticket to diabetes. You may want to reel this in, but
First of all, honey has so many healthy properties. It's not just the sugar content. It's like you're harvesting all these nutrients that the bees produce to make honey, right? Off of flowers. And we interviewed and are big fans of Bar Hill Gin. And they're in Vermont, big proponents of apiaries and the health and flourishing bee colonies and all that stuff. But it's two ingredients. It's juniper and it's honey. And because of all the botanicals, all those flowers that the bees are collecting from, they bring together like what you're doing with your honey. I mean, you could say, hey, it's on top of the this building in Old City, so it's Old City honey, or it's on top of the library, so it's library honey. It's properties and characteristics. So tell the doctor, hey, listen, this is good for me, and I could do worse, right?
Oh no, 100%. And honestly, if the good news is that the beekeeping season is relatively short in terms of our removals, so we're not genuinely worried about it. But no, it does make I love doing it. Like it's really fun tasting how different the honeys are from house to house and hive to hive, and the variation in there is it's amazing.
What really checked in for me about your website is, look, sometimes you never know what you have in your house. You never know what you have flying around your gardens. And you have a great pictorial identifying wasps and bees, because bees or yellow jackets, how do you tell the difference? What kind of wasp is it if it's a wasp? And look, I would say, look, if you are not sure what you may have flying around your house, go to your website and make sure that, or know what it is before either spraying something crazy or trying to, reach out to maybe an exterminator. Look, they may not know what they have on hand. And a resource like you is amazing to have. All that information is just there. So thanks for putting the time to take all those pictures and put those up.
Yeah, no worries at all. I'm one of the fortunate few who really likes what he does. I'm really into the bees and wasps, and it's one where it's like most of what we deal with around here, they get kind of a bad rep, predominantly because of just the yellow jackets alone. But I mean, we have 150 species of bee in Philadelphia. Forget, like, that doesn't even include the wasps, and so the majority of those are solitary, and they won't or can't sting anybody. So they're just awesome bugs. Like they're really neat.
We hear a lot in the news and on social media about the bee population and extinction and threats. You're on the ground all the time. We're heading into 2024 from 2023. How is the health of the bee population specifically to where you work in?
It's kind of a mixed bag. Our losses seem to be, right around as bad as they've ever been. And annually you're talking about nationwide loss of between 30 and 40%. So if you have 10 hives, you're losing 3 to 4. And it's not just over the winter. So it used to be years ago, you'd get your bees through the summer, everything going to be okay. And then wintertime was when you take your losses. Now it's like we're losing almost as many hives over the summer months as we are during the winter. So predominantly from a parasitic mite that we picked up from another honeybee species we think in Russia, but over in out in Asia, and so it's been real hard on that front. Writ large, and it's not just the honeybees, but a lot of our native bees, like the bumblebees, we're down to one species that's really dominating all others, and so in many cases we don't even know how the other bee species are doing, because nobody's really checking. There's money in honeybees, and so that's why there's been a lot of research. We kind of know what's going on. With the other ones, we don't even have a real gauge on it. It's trying to hit a moving target.
As fans of honey and what honey produces and the things that we get to enjoy, what can we do as just everyday people to help the bee population? Any ideas, tips, tricks to keep what you do going?
Plant more flowering plants, less lawn, and fewer pesticides. The less chemicals you can kind of throw out there, the better. I understand there are situations where you got to do, you need something fixed, but for the most part, particularly prophylactic sprays. There's been a movement on the extermination front where they want you to sign up for regular treatments where they spray your house. Don't do that. And if you have a lawn, I would say try and convert 30% of it to flowers. Anything, and if you see something that the bees like, plant more of that. Engage with it. Like, don't just, if you go outside and you start looking at flowers, you will start noticing bees that you've probably never seen before. And so, like if you see something they like, I mean, some of it's easy. Bees love clover. Pretty much all bees like clover. So just, that would be plant more flowers. You don't have to. I'd be happy to have everybody take up the smoker and bale and join us in the beekeeping, but it's not a necessity. Like, we don't need more beekeepers. We need more forage for the bees.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, what I understand is it's not just bees, but it's all pollinators. And if we lose those, or that could really impact our farming communities, our orchards, and all those things that we rely on for our food, our sustenance. So there's a lot that we can do, and I appreciate you interjecting that and educating us, and be more mindful about what you're putting down on the grass and spraying into the air, because you never know, beyond maybe having a beautiful lawn, you just don't know how that's going to affect the natural insects and habitat of what's going on.
Yeah, and it's one where it's like a green grass lawn is a desert for bees. Like, there's nothing there for them. And so in terms of the biodiversity, like, even if you have some clover in your lawn, just let it flower once. Let the bees hit it, and then you can mow it down. You don't have to grow hay fields in your front. Like, it doesn't have to be a meadow. But let the bees have a crack at it.
Pardon the interruption. Thank you so much for listening to Fermented Adventure, the podcast. Could you do us a favor? Hit that follow button. It makes it easier for others to find us, and it helps us climb in the rankings. Take a screenshot of the podcast, post it, tag us, and let everyone know that you listen to the Fermented Adventure podcast. Now, back to our podcast. We met at the Philadelphia Christmas market, and you have this really unique honey that caught my eye. And there's a real amazing story behind this. And this honey, I was so taken aback by just the story behind here. And we've teased it a little bit, but Doom Bloom. Doom Bloom. This is a honey that you make that is unlike anything anybody's doing right now. And you told us, and I was like, I did a double take. I'm like, no, you're making that up, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible. This is honey, and it incorporates, and I'm going to screw this up, so I'm going to let you tell the story.
Uh-huh.
Doom Bloom. What is Doom Bloom?
So Doom Bloom is spotted lanternfly honeydew. And so honeydews are honeys that are produced from a non-floral nectar source. And they're common in Australia and Europe, but usually with aphids. And so in this case, back in 2020, I walked into my honey house and I looked at my guys who were processing a hive we had just removed. And I said, who's eating maple bacon? Because that's what the smell kind of reminded me of. And they said, Don, it's not us, it's the honey. And I was like, come off it. And so I gave it a taste, and I was like, I don't know what this is. And so it had a mild smoke profile to it, and nothing botanically does that. And so I called up the state inspector, and he cut me right off, and he said, let me guess, you got weird honey. And I was like, yeah. And he said, you and every other beekeeper in southeastern Pennsylvania. He said, we're sending samples to the lab at Penn State. We'll figure it out. And so sure enough, the Penn State called everybody back and said that they had run some tests and it tested positive for lanternfly DNA and a lanthone. And the lanthone's a chemical in the tree of heaven, but only in the sap. And so here, the lanternfly are attacking the trees, and they're after the amino acids in the sap, but they can't do anything with the sugar. And so that is the honeydew that they drop on the lower canopy that's so destructive. So when we talk about lanternflies, and you'll see kind of like us. We talk about the black, like smutty mold or mildew that's on the ground beneath the trees where they're at. Well, that is there because what the honeydew is just sugar water. And so if you leave sugar water out, it will go bad. But the bees are collecting that before that happens, and they're bringing it back to hives like any other nectar source and making it into honey.
So this is spotted lanternfly excrement in
Correct.
a way that the bees are attracted to because of the sugar content, and they take this back and they make. All right, first of all, you had said I hadn't had this yet. I wanted to wait. It does have that hint of smokiness on the nose, and there's that back end, as you described it, this maple bacon. It's actually a wonderful graininess to this in the palate, and it lingers. I only took a little bit, but there's this wonderful difference that I don't think I've ever had in a honey before that makes this so unique. This is amazing, and I'm just concerned now that we had this threat that the spotted lanternfly wasn't going to go away, and now it seems like they come and then they migrate. So how is it for you right now to make sure that you can keep this doom bloom going and or just make sure it's on the shelves or you have it available?
So it's getting harder and harder year to year. Like last year, there was significantly less from the beekeepers that we had been sourcing it from, and so 2 years ago, I could have bought barrels of it, and last year I could only get a couple. And so what's likely to happen, the way the expansion's been going is that we're seeing, the front lines of the lanternfly expansion are real bad in terms of the number of the insects. And so that means in those areas, they're going to get a lot of honeydew. On the tail end of that, there's not as much. And so what we'll probably do next year is go further out with the expansion. But at some point, one of two things is going to happen. Like, we can go to Pittsburgh next year, but, I don't know if it's realistic for me to go to, say, Ohio and get honey shipped, so we're kind of hoping that the lanternflies stay not, we don't want them to stress our vineyards. I don't want to be benefiting from other people's suffering. And so, we're certainly not promoting the, keeping the lanternfly going. However, if they're around, if we can get just enough to keep the honey going, but not so many that they hurt other industries, that's kind of the sweet spot that we're hoping for.
You also make, besides Doom Bloom, I'm not going to say, I said you also make, your bees also make different, you have different varietals. Talk about some of those that you provide and that you're, putting into jars.
So we do seasonal and regional varietals within Philadelphia. And so each one of our yards, we'll harvest, at least once a year and then sometimes twice a year. And we'll label the jars with, what time of year we harvest. And then we actually put the zip codes or the foraging grounds, on the label. Bees fly anywhere up to 3 miles. And so, but usually it's about 1.5 miles from the hive to do their foraging. And so any zip code within 1.5 mile radius of our hives goes on the jar. So if you want honey from your backyard, you can literally get it. And then we'll label down we'll go hyper local. We'll put the nearest cross street to the apiary on there. And so every yard will get, we'll pull different honey. And we get, the variation, I talked about it earlier a little bit, it can be pretty crazy. We've gotten, I know in our Kensington yard, we've gotten purple honey before. And so, never enough for us to harvest exclusively, unfortunately. And if we did, I wouldn't give it to anyone. That really dark stuff I had in Old City, I hoarded that. We only got really 12 pounds of the real pure black stuff, but I would do tastings with it. And then, we did one at the Wilma Theater, and, the people were like, "Oh my gosh, this honey is amazing. Where can I get it?" And I was like, "You can't. This is craft
honey. That's part of what we do. And we talk to people in the craft industry, and this is craft honey. This is unlike anything. You're that woodworker taking that piece of wood and shaping it and molding it, and it comes out to be this beautiful bowl or whatever you're making. That's what you're doing with this honey. And when you talk about just different neighborhoods and different sections of the Philadelphia area, and that's what you do, you're taking the flavor And if people want to know what people want to know what Kensington tastes like, all right, it comes in honey because that's what's being pulled out from those bees to bring back to the hive. That I just came up with that. You can use that if you've never used that.
No, I will absolutely steal that. I appreciate that. But no, it's one of those where it's like people are really surprised that people are surprised you can even get honey in the city at all. Like I have other beekeepers that are just like shocked, and I'm just like, listen, the food's there. So we actually have a couple observation hives that we run. I run one of the Academy of Natural Sciences and then the Richmond Branch Library. And we had a postdoc from Penn State actually record the waggle dances of the bees. And so if you're unfamiliar, the waggle dance is how the bees communicate to one another where the hives are. And so they waggle on an angle, and whatever angle they waggle at tells direction, and however long they waggle for tells distance. And so you can record that and actually do the calculations and figure out where the bees are going. And so our bees at the Academy of Natural Sciences, they like the banks of the Schuylkill River. And the ones over at the Richmond Branch Library, they like Graffiti Pier. And so, it's people, when people ask, it's like, well, how do you know? And it's like, we can actually get down to that level. We could do heat maps if we wanted of where we're hit.
This conversation with me, you're giving me such an education. And I know that's also one of the things that you do. You mentioned it at Wilma, that you do educations and tastings. And if somebody wants to have you come out and educate them on honey and bees, that's something you'll readily do as well, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Any excuse to talk bees is a good one. And so, but I do everything from like preschool up to, college. I was out at University of Michigan a couple years ago for a symposium. We do a lot of like preschool, elementary, and then the Honey Fest every year. That's the whole reason I do like wear the bees on my face is to educate people about bees in general. A lot of people are really afraid of them, and it's one thing to say, oh, they're not really that bad. If you don't mess with them. It's another thing to take 15,000 and put them on your chops and say, see, like this is what we're talking about.
We are big fans of mead and braggots and anything that incorporates, those bartenders, those mixologists that are using honey. Give a shout out to some of those in our local area, or maybe somebody that's having you ship it out to them that are using your honeys in the Philadelphia area or nationally.
So we have, we've had our honey being used down at Tattooed Moms on South Street. They mix it up there. We have the Philadelphia Distilling Company. They use our honey there. You could actually buy it there. And so I personally on the braggots, I like to, New Trail is one of my favorite, breweries in the state. And so we do a lot of mixes with them. And so it's one where it's like, we're always looking for new opportunities. And so if there are people out there interested in trying it, by all means, look us up.
We know that there are mead producers, maybe even home mead makers that would love to have an edge to some of the competitions, or maybe just make it for themselves and impress themselves or their friends. And this is one of those things where I would say this is something unique that you should seek out, that if you're looking for, wow, I've never had that before. Well, you've never had this before. Whether you're back sweetening your mead or this is something you're making it with directly, definitely something you want to try. And to those bartenders around the city, you named a couple of great ones, but if you come up with a cocktail that's going to give this a little bit more of that, what is that flavor? What is being pronounced there? This is something that helps elevate your bar. We just interviewed Chris Tunstall of A Bar Above, and a lot of what they do, I'm sure, Chris would, come up with this very intricate cocktail that I'd be curious as to what he would call it. For you, do you make meads? Do you do home brewing?
I honestly, I don't, and and the main reason is that the last time I took up a hobby, it became a business, and an obsession. And so if I take up another one, my wife might hand me my papers. Predominantly what in terms of the drinking, like it's braggots, and this time of year, it's all about hot toddies. And so, you know, although my wife is not a whiskey drinker, and so we actually do tequila hot toddies for her. And so where we swap out the whiskey for a sipping tequila, and then the lemon for a lime, and that is actually that's real good. I'm not really a tequila guy. I love that. Like that drink is awesome.
See, and I'm thinking now that you just went down that road, I'm taking a mezcal because now I can nuance that smokiness of it and take it with the juiciness of the mezcal, and that would be great too. So I don't know if maybe your wife, but she might want to venture into mezcal on the next venture. Who knows?
Yeah, I might see if I can convince her on that one. Like I don't think she would need much pushing to make that happen.
Don, this has been awesome. Is there anything we didn't touch upon on the podcast today? Anything you want listeners to know more about you or the Philadelphia Bee Company?
I mean, we'll be if you're looking to buy our honey, we do a lot of events in the region, and so over the winter time, it's Christmas Village. Coming up, we actually have the Philly Home and Garden Show out at Oaks, and that is the last weekend of February. And then the following week, starting March 2nd, the Philadelphia Flower Show will be there. And so if you're looking to pick up some Doom Bloom, you'll be able to get it at that event.
Well, what I know is people come in from all over the country to go to the Philadelphia Flower Show. It's an event unlike anything you've ever seen, and that's a perfect time. But you also will ship. If you go to the website, you can ship that to them? Yeah,
100%. So if you go to philadelphiabee.com and you hit the shop button, then we can get you some honey.
Delicious, tremendous. I've only had this one now, and I can't wait to try the whole line. Also, you have a wonderful social media presence. Check Don out on Instagram, Facebook. You'll see some of the extractions that they do. Don's in full beard regalia, and he's showing that off, so you can see what that looks like. Don, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being a friend of Fermented Adventure. We look forward to seeing you at the Bee Show, all the Bee Convention, all the things that you're doing, and be safe out there. And just keep making this wonderful sweet nectar, putting into bottles and letting us all enjoy it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich. This was awesome. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Thank you, sir. And lift that glass, and when you're doing your next one, think of us at Fermented Adventure.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Cheers.